The smiling face of President Alexander Lukashenko gazed out from campaign posters across Belarus on Sunday as the country held an orchestrated election virtually guaranteed to give the 70-year-old autocrat yet another term on top of his 3 decades in power. Needed, the posters proclaimed beneath a photo of Lukashenko, his hands clasped together. The phrase is what groups of voters responded in campaign videos after supposedly being asked if they wanted him to serve again. But his opponents, many of whom are imprisoned or exiled abroad by his unrelenting crackdown on dissent and free speech, would disagree. They call the election a sham, much like the last one in 2020 that triggered months of protests that were unprecedented in the history of the country of 9 million people. The crackdown saw more than 65,000 arrests, with thousands beaten, bringing condemnation and sanctions from the West. His iron-fisted rule since 1994, Lukashenko took office 2 years after the demise of the Soviet Union, earned him the nickname of Europe's last dictator, relying on subsidies and political support from close ally Russia. Observers believe Lukashenko feared a repeat of those mass demonstrations amid economic troubles and the fighting in Ukraine, and so scheduled the vote in January, when few would want to fill the streets again, rather than in August. He faces only token opposition. The trauma of the 2020 protests was so deep that Lukashenko this time decided not to take risks and opted for the most reliable option when balloting looks more like a special operation to retain power than an election, Belarusian political analyst Valery Karbalevich said. Leading opponents have fled abroad or were thrown in prison. The country holds nearly 1,300 political prisoners, including Nobel Peace Prize laureate Ales Bialyatsky, founder of the Vyazna Human Rights Center. Since July, Lukashenko has pardoned more than 250 people. At the same time, authorities have sought to uproot dissent by arresting hundreds more in raids targeting relatives and friends of political prisoners. Lukashenko's 4 challengers on the ballot are all loyal to him. "I'm entering the race not against, but together with Lukashenko, and I'm ready to serve as his vanguard," said Communist Party candidate Sergei Sarenkov, who favors criminalizing LGBTQ+ activities and rebuilding monuments to Soviet leader Joseph Stalin. Oleg Gaidakevich, head of the Liberal Democratic Party, supported Lukashenko in 2020 and urged fellow candidates to make Lukashenko's enemies nauseous. The 4th challenger, Hanna Kanapatskaya, managed 1.7% of the vote in 2020 and says she's the only democratic alternative to Lukashenko, promising to lobby for freeing political prisoners but warning supporters against excessive initiative. The repressions have become even more brutal as this vote without choice is approached. But Lukashenko acts as though hundreds of thousands of people are still standing outside his palace, she said. The European Union rejected the election in Belarus on Sunday as illegitimate and threatened new sanctions. Today's sham election in Belarus has been neither free nor fair, EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas and EU Enlargement Commissioner Marta Kos said in a joint statement. Speaking at an hours-long news conference, Lukashenko said that he didn't rule out running for the top job again in 2030. Media freedom watchdog Reporters Without Borders filed a complaint against Lukashenko with the International Criminal Court over his crackdown on free speech that saw 397 journalists arrested since 2020. It said that 43 are in prison. Polling stations have removed the curtains covering ballot boxes, and voters are forbidden from photographing their ballots, a response to the opposition's call in 2020 for voters to take pictures to make it more difficult for authorities to rig the vote. Police conducted large-scale drills before the election. An Interior Ministry video showed helmeted riot police beating their shields with truncheons as a way to prepare for protest dispersals. Another featured an officer arresting a man posing as a voter, twisting his arm next to a ballot box. Belarus initially refused to allow observers from the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which monitored previous elections. It changed course this month and invited the OSCE, when it was already too late to organize a monitoring mission. Until 2020, Lukashenko could maneuver and play Russia against the West. But now, when Belarus' status is close to that of Russia's satellite, this North Korea-style election ties the Belarusian leader to the Kremlin even stronger, shortening the leash, said Artyom Shraibman, a Belarus expert with the Carnegie Russia and Eurasia Center. After the election, Lukashenko could try to ease his total dependence on Russia by again seeking to reach out to the West, he predicted. Lukashenko's interim goal is to use the election to confirm his legitimacy and try to overcome his isolation in order to at least start a conversation with the West about easing sanctions, Shraibman said.